President, María del Carmen, for your very beautiful speech. I also thank the University John Kennedy for giving me this honor. It's a pleasure to meet you and to learn about your achievement over the last 60 years. And I was especially pleased to hear that you are very embedded in the community around the whole country, that you are offering also people who are coming from lower, let's say, social spheres, the opportunities to learn. And I was also very happy to hear that your students are very much embedded in societies and they're contributing to the important, let's say, social changes in your beautiful country. I will share with you some of my new work, which I have been engaging in the last few years, and it is sort of the question of what is happening with subjectivity in today's times. We live in very challenging times with a lot of catastrophes, a lot of social changes, and a lot of technological changes. So one phenomena that I have observed is an increase of apathy, an increase also of the desire to switch off from too much bad information. Wherever we look, there are crises, there is war, there is anxiety also about the next catastrophes to come. So when I was growing up in the former Yugoslavia, we never spoke about apathy. Let's say people were living in difficult situation after World War II. They were rebuilding the society. There was poverty, but people were not speaking about the need to switch off or to kind of retreat into their private sphere. Now, when our country embraced capitalism and individualism, there have been changes in the social community. People lost the connections that they had before, and also individualism has been highly propagated. Now, countries that went through transition, like the one that I come from, but also, other socialist countries around the world, experienced actually a particular, let's say, social change. However, apathy in some way did not only start emerging in the last, let's say, decades, when countries embraced sort of a kind of a Western type of capitalism and individualism. Russian researchers who looked at what happened in Russia in the transition from socialism to kind of capitalism observed that apathy emerged in their country at the moment where people lost hope that there will be a possibility of a kind of a social change, that the society might turn for the better. The founder of the first sort of public research in Russia, already in the Soviet times, Yuri Levada, however, interestingly pointed out that there was a similarity between the apathy that existed in the early 2000s, where people were losing hope that there will be a social change, and in some kind of an apathy that already existed at the time of the socialist regime. So his idea was that on the outside it looked as if people were very passive, were becoming passive, very apathetic, but he said actually this was just a facade, because behind this people were actually constantly very resourceful to cheat the system, to find the holes in the system. So his point was that in the country where lies and cheating appear as the only way for people to succeed, apathy on the outside looks like the lack of interest in political engagement, like as if people are accepting that a certain authoritarian regime will stay forever. Now, these people who look, as if they kind of gave up on the possibility that there will be a social change, in private, however, are extremely active. They try to outwit the system. They're searching, to trick the system, which is why Levada calls them in some way tricksters, that they are, sort of people, actively figuring out, how to find some benefit for themselves. So in their private lives, people become cunning, and they are sort of envious of other people who succeed, not because they have worked hard to succeed, but because they have been better fraudsters. They have been better in tricking the system. These people are envied, but not respected. So in societies where it develops that people are sort of looking politically apathetic, but then, they are kind of searching for the ways to, circumvent the rules, people also stop being ashamed for, sort of disobeying the rules. And in some way, it looks that the people are also kind of losing the hope that any social change will be possible. And as a result, the social fabric of society is quickly changing. In countries which are embracing illiberal politics, or which are kind of functioning as some call them competitive authoritarianism, which means that there are elections, but opposition doesn't have much chance, for example, to win, we can see the rise of this kind of, let's say, the apathy, the feeling that in some way nothing can change. And some researchers who are studying, how countries transition from one system to another, like Bulgarian writer Ivan Krastev and American law professor Stephen Holmes, among them are saying that in socialism there was often a kind of an imitation that happened. When socialism collapsed, countries were imitating other countries, which were more, let's say, developed, which already had capitalism, but the socialist countries didn't have strong democratic institutions at work. My idea, however, is that, imitation plays an important role in the way, capitalism functions as such. So my idea is not that, we in Eastern Europe started imitating, but kind of imitation is very much part of, in the way neoliberal ideology is functioning, which is why we often hear as an advice, fake it until you make it. So it is interesting to see how much on the rise has been in the last years the so-called imposter syndrome, where people feel that someone will find out that they are not as good or not as successful as they look on the outside. Now, this push to appear successful on the outside and, the feeling of guilt that you have when you are not, in some ways has also been kind of leading people to start, suffering in a new way than before. And I want to explore, for example, some of the new symptoms. On top of this imposter symptom, for example, we also observe today an increase in burnout. So, some psychoanalysts are speaking about burnout being a new type of depression that we can observe in today's society, where we kind of exploit ourselves passionately until we collapse. A few days ago, I spoke here with an Argentinian entrepreneur who established many companies, and he told me that he was so burnt out recently that the only solution he found was to go to a jungle in Brazil and try ayahuasca. Now, this was an expensive trip. Now, he found clarity, as he said. Now there is a whole industry, not only in Brazil, in the jungles. It looked, like a good resort, if I understand. But also in the publishing, we can see so many books which are dealing with burnout, and so many courses are offered now to deal with it. So my worry is that the discourse on burnout did not open public debate about the nature of neoliberal capitalism and why this burnout is so much on the increase, but rather opened up, the doors on the whole new industry, which is teaching us how to find happiness. When I started working on apathy, I came across a lot of writings from 1950s from the United States, which were speaking positively about apathy. So their idea was that apathy is good. Why? If there are too many people who are passionate in society, we will have more conflicts than if we have some people who are apathetic and kind of switch off and don't want to participate. Now, there were also critics of this view, pointing out that apathy in society is never distributed equally. Often it is the upper classes who are much less apathetic, who want to keep the power in their hands, and maybe the lower classes sort of are apathetic, passive. Now, in the domain of psychiatry, there was also an interesting debate on apathy, where some psychiatrists wanted to perceive apathy as a new illness which should be placed into the DSM-A, with the kind of the Bible of psychiatric illnesses. They did not succeed with this. However, psychoanalysts have been starting writing about the changes that they observe in the practice, and a very interesting book which tackles the problem of apathy is the book called Not Working by a British psychoanalyst, Josh Cohen. Cohen writes that he encounters more and more patients who are working very hard at their workplace, but they are constantly dreaming about not working. He also says that some of these workers, are spending hours on the internet during the work, also searching which out of 100 different white t-shirts they will buy. The phenomenon from psychoanalysis is also that, especially in the United States, psychoanalysts are observing among teenagers the desire to switch off from the life that their parents are living. So American psychoanalyst Jameson Webster wrote about having, teenagers in treatment who have parents who went to good schools and who have good jobs, who are pushing their children to also, study hard so that they will go to good schools. But these children observe parents being miserable day after day. So the teenagers are dreaming about, going away from the lives that their parents are living, live in a village and have a dog. Now, a few months ago, I was in China and speaking with people there, they said their teenagers have exactly the same desires. Also, they want to have a dog, maybe live in the village, and maybe just work with some crafts. So the teenagers often are saying, our parents went to the best schools, they got successful jobs, they are totally anxious, they're so miserable, I'm not so stupid that I will repeat their mistakes. Now in China, they also started now rebelling, against the neoliberal system with a new kind of, let's say, technique, which is called lying low. One can, understand that as that you are doing at your work just the minimum so that you don't lose the work. Now, this is not a political yet action. It is not yet also a desire, to engage in social change, but it's a kind of an individual rebellion against, the system. So in conclusion, let me tackle what is really sort of happening in society. We can say that on the one hand, we truly see an increase in certain kind of an apathy, especially in the young generation. But on the other side, we also see an increase of what social scientists are calling alienation. So on the one hand, isolation and individualization of today's society has contributed to the feeling that society is kind of broken beyond repair, which is why, some people feel that nothing can be done, and they are kind of, let's say, removing themselves into their small groups or, in their private lives. Like in my home country, in Slovenia, I'm always afraid if elections are happening on a sunny day, because a lot of people will decide it's better to have a picnic than to go to vote. Now, if apathy is often sort of like, in an unconscious way, a strategy for a person to deal with too much information, like too many negative informations might be so hard to deal, and people are switching off. They stop listening to the news or looking at the social media. We can say that political alienation is something different. So alienation is often more of an active decision not to participate, not to engage, not to vote. So people might feel that no one represents their ideas, that, let's say, there is no one that they feel they should support among, let's say, the possible candidates on the ballot. So if the apathetic people appear often as if they don't care, alienated people in some way care, but they don't feel that anyone represents their position. I would say that we need to understand many layers of apathy. One apathy, of course, is linked to the bombardment with the media, with the negative news. The other also, with the sort of, let's say, the power of the social media, the new technologies, and still others have to do with the question of what is the future, in which kind of future we are going. Now, neoliberal ideology actually, in some way, likes to have apathetic people. We can say that, the feeling that everything is in your hands, that you are responsible for everything in your lives, and in some way contributes to the kind of the apathy that we can observe today. Now, there is also a certain kind of, let's say, logic of apathy, which is linked to the fact that many countries around the world are turning away from democracy, are embracing the so-called illiberal democracies, or are sort of, let's say, going in the direction of a kind of authoritarian populism. And, a lot of people, for example, now waiting for the elections in the United States are fearing, for example, where their country will go, and that kind of contributes to a particular kind of apathy where people are, feeling that they cannot fight anymore, this kind of a negative tendencies in society. Another very important question about the future is whether the type of democratic institutions that we have sort of embraced in the last decades will survive, whether, terms like human rights, notions like freedom and equality will still play an important role in the next decades to come. 2 months ago, I had a debate with the Commissioner for Human Rights of the Council of Europe about the idea of whether we can expand the notion of the human rights in the future. Some are speaking about the need that democracy is perceived as a human right. Others are speaking about the need to think about the human right which protects us from threats, coming from above, climate change, surveillance, and military attacks. The answer of the Commissioner was that we should be grateful that we have human rights that have been established, decades ago, almost 8 years ago, and because in today's times, probably they would not have been voted in. I would say that the biggest problem that we are facing today is really an envisioning, the future society that can bring, let's say, more equality, a change in regard to the, catastrophes that we are experiencing, especially related to climate change and wars. And it will be a big challenge for us, and our, let's say, children and grandchildren to sort of overcome, I would say, the divisions and especially the hatred that exists in today's society. So now that I have been working on apathy for some time, the psychoanalyst whom I quoted, Josh Cohen, my friend, has been working on anger at the same time. So we often meet to kind of explore the ideas of each other. And in the last meeting, we had, I would say, a good conclusion when we were discussing how to deal, with apathy and anger. So apathy is often looked at negatively. My idea is that there are moments where apathy can help us individually to, let's say, deal with some situations that are too much for us to mentally endure. Now, anger is often also looked negatively. However, also with anger, we have to see a positive side. Social changes are often, happening when people become angry enough to fight for them, which is why with these terms that I have tried to sort of, let's say, share with you, we need to be careful not to, let's say, look them only in one dimension. And I think that kind of a proper anger might mobilize us to really fight for some social changes, which I hope maybe in the future will come. Thank you.